Welcome to our shop clinic on flat repair. So before we go to Chad and how to actually repair a flat tire, we're going to go over some of the tools that you need. Your first thing is going to be a way to carry your tools. You have really two options. Neither one is right or wrong. This is a hip pack, goes on your body. Some people prefer that. Other people are going to have a bag that goes on their bike. Yep. And this is nice if you're going between like gravel bike, road bike, mountain bike, fat tire, just quick plug and play. Probably one of your more important tools is going to be a good multi-tool. So that's going to be one that has all your different bits. I have needed virtually every single one from tightening up a bolt for like my water bottle to crashing and my lever all of a sudden decided to be standing up. Also, you are going to probably snap a chain if you do any mountain biking, so having something that has a chain breaker is very helpful. But good multi-tools will save you. They're not overly expensive and they're very handy. Next one is going to be a way to get your tire off of your bike. So tire lever, we've got park tool ones, some 3 at a time. Any tire lever is good. It's a necessity if you're going to be running, especially mountain bike. This is where people are going to kind of differ just a little bit. You need a way to inflate your tire. So you can have like a hand pump. So this is a Click by Crank Brothers, I believe. This we've found is excellent, especially for a fat tire for mountain biking.
We actually used it on the trail. We got one pump out and it didn't work. And so
Yep.
I, for some reason, had 2 hand pumps with me that day. And so
Yep.
I got that one out of my hip pack and actually
Yep.
played with that. So that's been our go-to.
Yep. Very compact, very easy to use as far as all of it goes. Magnetic, clicks right in, has a little gauge. Fantastic versus spending 20 minutes pumping and pumping because you decided to go cheap. But having a pump of any kind, whether it's on your body like on a bag or attached to the bike, either is going to work perfectly fine. This is...
Yep. So they call it Click because the hose magnets on.
Yep. If you do not want to use a pump, you can use CO2 cartridges. If you run this route, you would probably want to carry a couple of these. The caveat to that is that if you have to use them, they're excellent for getting you back home, like they'll inflate your tire. But if you use one, you need to let all of that gas out of your tube and then refill with air, just the way CO2 settles. It just ends up, I think it just deflates it considerably and it's not good for long-term use. Yep. So those are kind of like your necessity have to have types. From there, you kind of run into optional stuff. Again, if you're like mountain biking, having master links for your chain. So I know I have a 12-speed. I carry 2 master links because on a ride, somebody decided to break his chain twice, and each of us having, that'd be Chad if we don't know. But having 2 master links definitely has come in very handy, and instead of having to hike a bike, we were able to actually like ride out. So preferred to have at least one. And then from there, this is purely if you're running tubeless. So tubeless is very good as far as like keeping you riding, especially like gravel, mountain bike. But it is not the end-all be-all. You will get long slashes and cuts where the stands isn't going to plug. And I believe Chad had that issue last year where he had a considerable gash and the stands wasn't plugging. He tried to use a plug, that didn't work. So it's good, but also like you just need to kind of run extra stuff. So like I have an extra 2 ounces of stands, so if I get a really good puncture and I know I lost a lot of sealant, I can still like refill it, limp home, make it. Again, plug is there to, if I have that big slash that just happens to, it's a gusher and you need to be a doctor and stab it, it's there. But like as far as like your essentials or your necessities, that's where
so we grabbed this bike because it has a quick release and a through axle. So we'll cover wheel removal for both. Start on the rear. So if you have to move the rear wheel, it's best to have the chain all the way to the outside. That's because then you have the most slack to get the wheel out. If you're all the way into an easier gear, getting these pulleys out past this large cog can be difficult. So I'm going to start by opening up the quick release, and most time it's just going to fall out. Grab your derailleur and pull that down. That's just going to slide out. If you have a rim brake, you're going to want to disconnect that. A linear pull brake. Usually if you squeeze the brake together, you can kind of see there'll be like a cable end to remove, but disc brakes super common now. So if you have a rim brake and you want to know how to release that after, just let us know and we can probably find one like what you have and do that. So first thing we're doing, we're breaking that bead. So I usually put both my thumbs in one place, grip, and just kind of like pinch that back. It can be a bugger on some tires. Usually when there's more surface to deal with, like a mountain bike tire, there's a little easier. Some of those high pressure tires can be really hard to deal with if you're dealing with a road bike. So this is where we take our tire lever. I want to grab the tire and just kind of pull it back, and then you end up with a gap of the tire to get under the bead. We're just going to pull that out. Next thing I like to do is not start from here. I usually rotate it about 90 degrees so I can use my body weight to push down, because some of those beads are really tough to deal with. And some really just pop right out. So again, if you have a high pressure road tire, that might be the one that really is tough to get out. Mountain bike tires, there's enough sidewall and flex to make that happen really easily. So then we have a little nut that may or may not be on your Presta or Schrader valve to remove. So from there, in the shop, what we do is we keep this orientated in a direction to where we can later search for punctures or things that may have actually caused our flat. So when I pull this tube out, pulling this back to make room for my valve to come out. So when I pull this out, it's trapped under my tire. I'm going to keep this tube oriented in the same direction that I pull it out. If you have the luxury to, like in your garage or shop, to reinflate this to look for the source of the hole. So like you might say, for instance, you find your hole over here. So like, you can then look at your wheel, like, okay, pulled it out right here. Now I can search on this side for whatever caused the puncture. If you are on the side of the road and you want to use a hand pump, you can. Chances are you're going to kind of wear yourself out trying to pump air in as it's leaking, because those small hand pumps, like for the side of the road, are not super high volume. So best thing to do then is just take your wheel, go slow, start looking for something that would have stuck through there. If you didn't find anything through this way, if you want to remove your tire all the way, you can. Or if you want to go through and look for something, you can. If you don't find anything at that point, then you might want to put that tube in, because more than likely, if you're running a tube, if you stick a new one in, you're just going to create a new flat at some point. So reinserting this, if you have a new tube that's completely flat, all rolled in, you're going to want to put some air in it to begin with to give it some shape. If you just take a flat tube and you start stuffing it around in the tire, when you reinflate that, there might be twists in it or something of that nature that you didn't see, and eventually that'll just wear through and create a pinch point that creates another flat. So if you can give this some sort of shape, that's going to be your best bet. So in the shop, just give it just enough, and you can always let some back out. Again, sometimes how we treat things in the shop's a little different than on the trail, just because we have the luxury of stands and compressed air, things of that nature. So from here, I'm just sticking my valve through, and just pulling this tire up over. And so this is the same technique you're going to use whether it's a road or a mountain. And then I'm just going through and stuffing this thing all the way around. Okay, at this point, I may have too much air in, but I'd rather get this thing seated in all the way. And then I can always let some back out, but I at least know that the general orientation of the tube is in there correctly. And so a lot of times, like kind of pretending I'm on the trail, but if you're at home, one of the coolest tools you can use for a flat is literally just a trash can. Makes for a nice little work surface. But if you're on the trail and you don't have that luxury, you're probably going to put this back on the ground, try and find a soft spot so you're not wrecking all this stuff. And especially if you have a disc brake on one side and you're going this side down, you want to be careful that you're not sticking that rotor on top of anything that might bend that, because that's just going to create your next problem. And as I'm going in with this, the tube got seated in over here. So when you get started, because then when I put my air source on, I'm not going to push my tube back into my rim. That's about the only time that we feel that those pieces are important. So if you're running your tire without those, it's not really a big deal. It just aids for the inflation. Then, yeah. So there I had to overinflate it to get it seated. It's not really the end of the world if it's not seated, if you just got a couple miles to go, but you will kind of notice a little bit of ride quality. Or if you're looking at your tire, you'll see it kind of wobble back and forth if it's not seated. But if you're just trying to get yourself home, that's another story. So remounting this, pulling back down on our derailleur, we're going to put our gears on the underside of the chain and then just go straight up in there. And this is where we kind of mess with our QR. So one of the tricks, yep, come on over. Yeah. Yeah, you can yep, you can come in close. Yep, so we're grabbing here. Okay. And then we're gonna hook these in underneath. And so long as the gears are close to the outside, once you will spin this at the end to get it back on the correct gear. And I'm just going to hold it up in this general orientation to try and keep it square. From there, you can spin this and get it there. And if it happens to be in the air, one of the best things you can do with a quick release afterwards is set it on the ground, open that quick release back up, and make sure that frame has seated on that axle, and then close it back up. That way you're sure it's square. You can pick it up and spin it. Rotor doesn't drag, so feel pretty confident that that's good. And then you can switch into a lower gear or get a running start. If you have a through axle, so that's going to require the tool. Same procedure for this, you're just pulling out the axle. If you haven't ever had a through axle out, it's basically just a giant bolt that goes through. They do a better job of tying your wheel and frame together. So we just backed it out. That just slides out and the wheel drops free. Same thing we're just going to reinsert that. There'll be some stops that wheel sits in. Just going to reinsert that and spin it till it's hand tight, and just give it a little crank, and you're good for the trail. So when you get a puncture with one of these, one of the tricks is, you think of like how your blood coagulates. It takes time to seal up. If I pricked myself, I'd bleed, and it'd bleed for a little bit and stop. Tubeless is going to do the same thing. If you ride and you have enough fluid in there and it's not sealing, you're going to see some fluid continue to like fling out and coat your bike, and it's kind of slippery and it gets messy. So the best thing to do when you find where that spot is, say it's down at the valve stem, is stop where you're at, put where the leak is at down, because then all of your fluid's going to go down to that spot. And sometimes you might need to shake it just to kind of like mix it up a little bit, get around there. And sometimes it could be on your rim tape side as well. We just had a customer in earlier that got like a nail through his tire about that long, went through his tire and also hit his rim and broke his tape that seals on the inside. So then he had not only air escaping this way, but also this way, and he wasn't able to save the patient on the trail. But that is a potential issue. If the tire's going flat and it's not sealing, just put some more air in it, because it needs air to like pressurize to push all of that stuff to it. This is why when Abe was talking about how sealant is really good for a lot of things, but it's not for everybody. I've had tires that we've taken off and there's little, just like almost like little boogers in there where something protruded in, like a little thorn or something, and it's sealed right around it, and never even knew that we got a puncture. So it definitely can save, but there's some maintenance upkeep to it. So again, when Abe had more sealant, so I've been on a gravel ride with Matt, and I had a leak right near my sidewall, which is kind of a tricky spot, and it wasn't sealing. So I pulled my core out, put some more sealant in it, put it back in, got some more air in. You're shaking around that spot, and it stops, and you're like, okay, I think I'm good. So we started riding again, and then you're like, you're like, okay. At one point, Matt's like, if you don't fix it, we're going to stop and put a tube in. And at this point, I know I have all the sealant in, and I'm like, I'm not dealing with that. I'm not putting a tube in. So I just kept like dealing with this stuff. So again, it's not a magic talisman for flats, but it does work really well for lower pressure riding, preventing pinch flats, offering a more supple ride because you don't have the inner tube in. It's just a lighter riding experience. But dealing with those. Oh boy. And like that, it's sealed. So right now, like it's sealed really fast. I may or may not be able to ride on this for a little bit. I've also had where I've put a dart in it, which is when you get into a larger hole and all those little particles weren't able to seal that right away. It held on just main trails, but we were mountain biking, and so I started going over more rocks and roots, and like you'd go over something big and you hear this psst. I'm like, I'm just gonna go home. Like I rode from Lime Creek back up to the shop. Like it's gonna hold to get me out, but my actual ride may be done. So that's something that happens too. So any questions on tubeless? Yeah, you can see where it's kind of bubbling through right there.
So kind of the caveat or the thing with tubeless is that it does require more maintenance. So typically beginning of the season, you'll put your fresh sealant in, whether it's, like 4 ounces here. And then usually about mid-season, you want to refresh it, whether you're putting 1 or 2 ounces in, just to kind of, replace anything that you've lost. End of the season is where it gets important, where, you remove your tire, dump all your old stands out, really wipe it out, because you'll, like again, Chad said, you'll have punctures where, it'll booger up, it'll coagulate wherever it was on here. But I mean, that basically just becomes like a big lug. So if you can clean that out, and then that way, beginning of next season, you have a basically fresh tire, it's clean, dump your stands back in, and then it's just kind of a rinse and repeat. It's just that if you let it go too long, it basically just all solidifies, and then you're basically sitting there just pulling, dried stands, which can be very time consuming, frustrating, not the most fun of times.